Okay. Native Americans of the 1700s. Many long days ago, when the Lenape, Delaware, lived in the east, and the faraway land of Pennsylvania, they must have been numerous, and there must have been many different tribes at the time. This is the beginning of a story told by the Delaware people. After leaving Pennsylvania, the Delaware settled in Ohio. For about 100 years they lived here. Then they were forced to move to places even farther west. Okay, and so look over here on our, this is what we like to call a sidebar, right? These are the words that we're looking for. Trading post, lick, and I'm telling you, lick doesn't mean what you think it does. Longhouse, wigwam, teepee. We looked at those already, didn't we? And council, right? All right, here we go.
I know what a teepee is.
The mound builders you read about in the last lesson no longer lived in Ohio by about 350 years ago. For a time, no one built permanent structures or settlements in Ohio at all. Then, in the early 1700s, Native Americans returned. We call these new groups of Native Americans historic Indians. Why?
Historic means
There was a written. Oh, good. Yes, good. You kept reading. Historic means we have a written record that tells about their lives. Even so, we do not always know what Native Americans thought or felt at the time. That is because most of the records left behind were made by French and English settlers. You will read more about the Europeans and their contact with Ohio's Native Americans in the next chapter. This chapter tells the story of Ohio's historic Indians. Native Americans return. For much of the 1600s, the only Native Americans in Ohio were hunters passing through the area. Then, beginning about 1740, Native American people once again came to settle. 6 cultures. New groups of Native Americans moved to Ohio in search of hunting grounds. Some came because of the fights with other groups of Native Americans. Others were pushed off their land by Europeans who wanted to clear Native American hunting grounds to make way for farmland. 6 different groups of Native Americans settled in Ohio during the 1700s. Look at the infographic on page 76 to find where each group lived. Today, many Ohio cities, forests, and rivers carry the names of the Native American groups who settled here. There they are, settled by the river there. See that picture?
Mm-hmm. That's basically like the main structure of a teepee. Yeah.
Each group of Ohio's Native Americans had its own leaders and culture. They had their own own languages, holidays, customs, beliefs, and art. Still, these 6 cultures had much in common. Imagine you could step back in time to the 1700s. As you drift down the river in a canoe, this is what you might see. So now we're at the beginning of the trip, right? As you push off from shore, you notice that the water runs clear. Fish swim by, and large turtles sun themselves on logs. You pass people in the bark canoes paddling upstream to the trading post. Their canoes are piled high with furs. At the trading post, Native Americans and Europeans will trade goods. So now we know what a trading post is, right? Yeah. When the Native Americans float back downstream, they will return with copper kettles, guns, tools, blankets, and cloth that they received in trade for their furs. A glimpse of the village. As you continue your trip downriver, you see hunters heading toward the forest carrying bows and arrows. The hunters wear clothing and shoes made of deerskin. On their skin, they have smeared animal fat to keep away mosquitoes. The sights from the river. As you float, you see smoke rising from the far-off fields. To clear the land for planting, farmers light fires to burn off plants and trees. They used to do that in Italy too. Once the fields are cleared, women plant seeds with digging sticks. In some of the fields, tall corn and tobacco plants rise above gourds and pumpkins. So did these Native Americans plant farms? Yes, they did. In the apple orchards, women are picking fruit. Others walk through the forest searching for banks, bark, roots, and leaves to make into medicine. Children help their mothers. Ooh, look, don't you see it? That's awesome.
There's a kid whacking a tree.
Chopping it,
I
right?
feel like they're making a new hut.
Campsite, right?
Yeah.
A woman discovers a beehive in a hollow tree. She hangs the cradle board that holds her baby. Then she uses both hands to scoop out the honey. In spring, the mother will collect sap from the maple trees to make maple syrup. You hear dogs barking in the distance as you come closer to the village. Women and young girls stand near the campfire watching over a pot of boiling water. Earlier in the day, they had filled the pot with water from a salt spring called a lick. So a lick is just salt water, right?
Yeah.
After the water boils away, so all the water will boil away, only salt remains. The women rub the salt onto deer meat to keep the meat from spoiling. So they didn't have freezers, so they had to put salt on the meat to keep it,
I kind of knew
from
that
spoiling.
in second grade.
Yep. The day's end. Young boys carrying small bow and arrows run to meet the returning hunters. Girls help their mothers grind corn into meal for corn cakes to eat with their dinner of thick corn soup. After the evening meal, the men talk about the day's hunt. A shaman thanks the spirits for the hunter's success. As the sun sets, campfires flicker. Another day has ended in the forest. Family life. The American villages, like the one just described, life centered around the family. The family included more than just parents and their children. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins were all part of the family too. That's not like ours really nowadays, huh? Right? Often the family lived together in the same home or next to each other in the same village. Each Native American group built shelters in its own way. The chart below, you can see some of the different homes that the Native American people lived in. So take a look. Ready?
Log house, a wigwam, and a teepee.
So we have Wyandotte, Ottawa, and some Mingo. They built what kind of house?
Longhouse.
The Wyandotte, Ottawa, and Mingo, they built the longhouse, right? A wood pole frame was covered with strips of bark. Inside the longhouse was divided into smaller rooms. So that's just a big apartment, right?
Yeah.
The wigwam, built by the Delaware, Shawnee, Miami, and Mingo. The wigwam is a rounded hut. Usually only one family lived in there. It was a curved wood pole frame that was covered in bark, grass, and animal skins. The teepee, built by various Native American hunters. I bet you most of them did this.
Mhm.
Hunters built teepees while away on summer hunts. These teepees held only a few people. Pole frame covered in grass and mats. Okay?
And those are our three vocabulary words.
Yep, teepees, wigwams. So there's all the information you need on those, right? All right, let's keep going. Here's an infographic. So this is really cool. So let me just take this real quick, and you need to sit still. All right, so let's take a look. We have the Ottawa that lived in western Ohio, right here, right? So this is west, this is south, north, and then over here, obviously, is the east. So we had the Mingo. The Mingo would have been closer to us, right? They were in the northeast, right? Also called the Seneca, moved from the east in the 1740s. They made this mask. Ooh, let's see it. See it? Oh, I cut it out of the picture. Okay. Now we have the Wyandotte. The Wyandotte came from Ontario, Canada in the 1740s. They made this wooden mask, right? They would have been more like in the Columbus area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Miami. Miami came from Wisconsin in the 1740s. They made these moccasins. Shawnee. Europeans moving into Pennsylvania and Kentucky pushed the Shawnee into Ohio about 1740. They made this carrying bag. And then the Delaware were pushed west from New Jersey by Europeans in the 1750s. Right? So there's how many groups here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different groups living in Ohio. All because Europeans pushed them further west from Pennsylvania and New Jersey, right? Here we go. Here we go. Life based on respect. Just like people today, Native Americans wanted other villagers to respect them. This means they wanted others to think well of them. Villagers respected those who were helpful and those who worked well with others. Parents taught their children to respect adults. They also taught their children to treat animals, plants, and the land with respect. Wise leadership. Both parents and children respected their leaders. Leaders were chosen by the village council because of their bravery and wisdom. A council is a group of people who meet to talk and make decisions. The council chose a leader who could do those things, right? Who could help solve village problems and settle arguments. Leaders set a good example for others to follow, but they did not tell others what to do. People followed the rules because they did not want to lose the respect of their neighbors and friends and families. Religion. Each Native American culture had its own religion. Most Native Americans believed that things in nature, such as water, wind, and land, had spirits or souls, right? Each season, the villages held festivals to thank the spirits for good harvests and good hunting. Drummers played music and chanted while others shook hollow gourds filled with seeds. Villagers wore masks and special clothes as they danced. Two sides to trading. What's another word for trading goods without money? Starts with a B, yeah.
Bartering.
Yes. You remember the Indian traders from the imaginary trip down the river. At the trading post, Europeans bartered with the Native Americans for furs. Europeans then sold these furs in Europe for a lot of money. To Native Americans, trading furs for needed items made good sense. One Native American explained, "The English have no sense. They give us 20 knives for one beaver skin." The meeting of Europeans and Native Americans brought many changes to the Native American ways of life. Some of the changes were caused by disease. You know how people catch colds and other sickness from each other. Europeans unknowingly carried disease such as measles and smallpox with them when they came to North America. So measles and smallpox did not exist in North America until the Europeans got here. Well, Jack, since measles and smallpox didn't exist amongst the Native Americans, when they caught it, they didn't have immunity to it and it killed them until they built up an immunity, right? These diseases were new to North America, and it did not take long for the Native Americans to catch them. Many Native Americans got very sick. Thousands died. Many times, whole villages were wiped out. Trade brings changes. European traders also brought guns to Native Americans. Since guns made hunting easier, Native Americans eagerly traded to get them. Soon, many Native Americans spent more time traveling and trapping animals than they did doing other things. They gave up many of their own ways of making clothes and tools from the resources around them and began using things made by Europeans. Native Americans began to fight each other to claim new hunting grounds, and guns made these fights even more deadly. The number of deer, beaver, and otter fell as hunters killed more and more for trade. At times, the number of forest animals dropped so low that there were not enough furs left to trade and not enough animals left for food. A different way of thinking. Europeans' desire for land brought even more problems for Native Americans. When it came to land, Native Americans and European settlers had very different ideas. Native Americans believed that no one owned the land. People had the right to use the land and its resources, but not to own the land for all time. Europeans saw things differently. They bought and sold land. For Europeans, it made sense for landowners to keep others off their land. Europeans didn't feel they needed to let others hunt animals or camp on the land they owned. Right? That's a big difference in opinion, right? To sum it up, why it matters. In the coming years, this struggle for Ohio's land led European and Native Americans into bitter fights. Although most Native Americans were forced out of Ohio in the mid 1800s, many eventually returned. About 20,000 Native Americans live in Ohio today. To sum it up, 6 different groups of Native Americans moved in Ohio in the 1700s, right? We just went through those 6 groups. Religion, family, and respect shaped the everyday life of Native Americans. Trade with Europeans caused many problems for Native Americans. All right, so there we have it. I'll shut this screencast off.